Dear students, today we will discuss about research variables. So these are all the characteristics which are observed by the researcher in his research. So what is variable? So variable in a simple term, if we say it's just something varies. So something which is keep changing its properties, we call it as variables. So it is defined as an attribute or characteristic that can have more than one value. We call it as variable. So any characteristic or attribute or a property which has more than one value, we call it as a variable. So in general, if we say the researchers what he study in his the characteristics or properties what he study in his research, we call it as variables. The examples of variables are age, weight, height, religion, etc. So we'll move on to types of variables. So there are different types of variables. They are independent variable, dependent variable, extraneous variable, demographic variable, and research variable. We will discuss one by one. So what is an independent variable? It is a variable that is controlled or changed in a research experiment. So in a research problem statement, if there is a variable which is controlled by the researcher, we call it as an independent variable. So it represents the cause or reason of the research work. These variables can be changed or manipulated by the researcher for the study purpose. Okay, so the variable which is taking part in the research, which is changed or manipulated and controlled by the researcher, we call it as an independent variable. The other name for independent variable is experimental variable. Because the researcher is manipulating it for his experiment purpose, this variable is called as experimental variable. I will give you an example after explaining the dependent variable. So what is dependent variable? So it is a variable that is affected or depend on response to manipulation of other variables. So when we manipulate the independent variable, it is getting affected in the dependent variable. So the variable which is getting affected by the independent variable, we call it as dependent variable. So if the independent variable is the cause, then the dependent variable is the effect. It is the presumed effect of independent variable. So the dependent variable is the presumed effect of an independent variable. So that is the reason if we call the independent variable as an experimental variable, we call the dependent variable as an outcome variable. The next variable is extraneous variable. So what is extraneous variables? The variables which are exist in all types of research studies, but the researcher does not include them for the research purpose. So the variables which are existing around the other variables or along with the other variables, but the researcher will not be studying these variables in his research. Those variables are called as extraneous variables. There are different types of extraneous variables. In some of the books, these different types have been explained as different types of variables also. Okay, so the extraneous variables are again classified as biological variable, environmental variable, and health related variable. So the biological variables are like age, sex, body mass index, weight, height, all those biological variants. All those things comes under biological variables. Environmental variable include all the environmental factors like climate, weather, the place of the like rural or urban, all those things comes under environmental variable. There are health related variables, that is like type of the disease, stage of illness, medications what they are taking, or type of the treatment. All those things comes under health related variable. So the extraneous variables or the variables which are not taking part in the research but it may affect the research study. Okay, there are different types like biological, environmental, health related variable. the, we will discuss all these three variables with an example here. So a researcher is going to do an research by providing a calm and quiet environment in bedtime at night will allow sound sleep to a patient in a general ward. This is the research problem statement of a researcher. So what the researcher is going to do is he is going to provide a calm and quiet environment in the night, and he is going to assess the sleep of the patient in general ward. So in the above example, what is the independent variable? Here the researcher is going to manipulate the environment by providing a calm and quiet environment. So here the independent variable is calm and quiet environment. And what the researcher is going to assess is sleep pattern of the patient in general ward. So that is the dependent variable. Why we say sleep as a dependent variable? Because calm and quiet environment will leads to, or it will affect the sleep pattern of the patient. So the presumed cause is calm and quiet environment, and the presumed effect is sleep. So the independent variable is calm and quiet environment, and the dependent variable is sleep pattern. Clear? The experimental variable is calm and quiet environment, and the outcome variable is sleep pattern of the patient. That is dependent variable. So the sleep is not only depends on the calm and quiet environment. There are other factors which are affecting the sleep during the study of the research. Okay, it is not only a calm and quiet environment will provide the patient a sleep, because the patient may have a disease condition which, or pain, or the medication which may affect the sleep as well. So those things are called as extraneous variables. So in this study, the extraneous variables can be age, pain, psychological condition of the patient, medications or other treatment or disease conditions. So all those things comes under extraneous variable which is not taking part in the study, because the researcher is going to observe only the common quiet environment and the sleep pattern. Hope you understood. We'll move on to the next type, that is demographic variables. So the researcher, along with his research study, he will analyze some of the characteristics and attributes or properties of the study sample he's collecting. So, for example, it can be age, gender, income, marital status, occupation, religion, economic status. All those things or characteristics or attributes which are analyzed by the researcher in his study, we call it as demographic variables. Otherwise, the demographic variables are called as attribute variables. Okay, so there are four different types of variables: independent variable, dependent variable, extraneous variables, and demographic variables. Extraneous variables can be again classified as biological, health related, or environmental variables. The next one is research variables, which is very important. In some studies, there will be one variable which is observed by the researcher. For example, prevalence of tuberculosis in Venkara village, or a study about sleep apnea in obese patients. Here, sleep apnea and the tuberculosis, there is only one variable. The researcher is going to study this variable without any manipulation. So he is not going to do anything, and he is naturally observing all these variables. So in that case, as we call it as research variable, it is a property or characteristic that is studied in descriptive studies without manipulation in natural setting. We call it as research variable. Hope you understood. And this is an exam point of view question. They have frequently asked this difference between independent and dependent variable in university question papers. So what is the difference between independent and dependent variable? While explaining itself, I have given lot of difference between. Yes, independent variable is manipulated by the researcher, whereas dependent variable is measures the outcome of by the researcher. Independent variable is a predictor, whereas dependent variable is a criterion. This is the end result of the independent variable. Independent variable is the presumed cause, whereas dependent variable is the presumed effect. Independent variable we call it as stimulus, and dependent variable as an outcome. So independent variable is called as experimental variable, and the dependent variable as outcome variable. You can write that also as a difference. Independent variable is an antecedent effect, whereas dependent variable is the consequence. So it is the other way of saying cause and effect. We say it is antecedent and consequence. And you can write the example of what I have mentioned. and you can write what is the independent variable in that example and what is the dependent variable in the example. You can explain it with an example. Okay, thank you so much for watching this small video. We'll see you with another video.